I'm just putting this on here for fun because it's I I monitor a lot of traffic, radio traffic, and how alphanumeric uh, communication is being, how do I put it, kicked back out, sort of the way the morphogenetic field structure of communication works with artificial intelligence, right? And so, what prompted this was because and this is particularly true when you think of the minus slash the plus, right? And what I call an electron distribution table between minus slash plus, right? And so one of the things that I monitored over, if you want to think of it as change, the changes that take place between past, present, and future experiences, which are the completion of magnetic moment, which are the completion of circuits between both the poles. Even though I acknowledge I'm a monopole, right? Monatomic, and as a polarity integrator. And so what I do is I'm looking for language changes. If you want to think of language as numbers, as energy, fire letters, right? Reverse fire letters, forward fire letters, letters that fire, circles, right? The lettering, the codes, the programming codes, programming language, what's held in memory, what's kicked back out. Okay, so here's what did it. Why I did this is I'm listening to the coded words. Like I'll give you an example, Mr. Astrology, okay, which is named Santos Bonanici, who's got a pretty good subscriber base, and I've watched his stuff, formation of consciousness, informing, in flow. So I was looking at a lot of the graphics that he was presenting on whiteboards, books he's read, uh, and so he's a well informed being of what he holds in memory, which means it's already happened. So now he's kicking back out what's been held in memory, and now he's regurgitating it in present moment communication, right? So I was watching a presentation by Mr. Astrology, and there is a reason why some people put comments turned off, and I'm not going to get into that subject now because it's big, but you can take it in whatever direction you want, obviously, because I don't impose my will, which is my energy, on anybody, because we don't hold energy captive, right? But here we have a show that I watch from time to time, which is Undisputed. See, so what you have is force against force, because these are two males that are going to argue against each other. So we covered arguments, valid arguments, with artificial intelligence, which is the language, which is the numbers that are communicating with each other between software terminals as antennas. So what I noticed is that Mr. Astrology talked the other day about Santa down the chimney, when he was talking about the physiology, which is the relationship of the neural circuits, the central nervous system, and the secretions of hormones between the pituitary gland, the spinal cord, spinal fluid, and all the rest of that. And then it's funny how that information about Santa and the chimney is related to the physiology of the central nervous system and the neurochemical messengers. So this morning you see on Undisputed how Mr. Skip Bayless talked about Santa down the chimney, that's now related to the words that he was using to describe how the movement, or if you will, the information codes were experienced visually on the visible light spectrum in a football game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tom Brady, and who was the other team? Carolina, I believe it was. Carolina. Depends on how you want to pronounce it. And then you get into the language between, if you will, the native tribes associated with ancestral spiritual knowledge. And then, of course, you get into Babylon, reverse flow speech, right? Going back in time, negative magnetic polarity currents, positive magnetic polarity currents. And when you're at zero, you're in perfect balance with your water worlds, which means remember when you go in a motel room, you got the do not disturb sign, right? Put the do not disturb sign on the handle, the door handle. Now you get into handlers, CIA handlers. Turbulence in the water. Hey, my water's in a state of peace because it's in a state of balance, right? Thermal gradients. And between hot and cold, so you got a built-in voltage regulator of thermal gradients, right? So your water worlds are in peace and running a high-speed electrical wave, which is the electrical potential of hydrogen, to eliminate waste product, or what we call input, right? Which is the experience, and then the output, which is the byproduct of that experience, right? And so it was funny how this was tied directly in this. And so this is sort of what I monitor over time, is how the language of sound is produced out of these two terminals between one moment of time and another moment of time on an event horizon. So what you see is how these minds' energy are communicating and regurgitating back out through the AI what is also being experienced and communicated through people in the spiritual community. So this is it is, in a very real sense, however, the balance between what you experience and the way that these alphanumeric formatting codes in formation of consciousness that is cross-indexing records that are being recorded between all of the different recording devices, or what we call an audio-video player. Remember, play 2, record 1, rewind, fast forward, right? So you realize, a stereo receiver and transmitter, TV projection, so, this goes back to childhood, when I realized in the 1950s, when the first black and white TV came into our house in the Bay Area of Northern California, and it's just like telling my parents TV is trying to program me, which simply means that the mirror, what you're experiencing in your mirror, is presenting codes of information that represent what's going to be held in memory, which is programming language that you do not want to hold in RAM, or you do not want to record. And the way that relates to future proofs past, back to the future that we experience, right? Based on the speed in which we're learning how programming works, of what we choose to hold in memory as codes, right? So now you begin to go back to the breaking the time loop. So when you're always in the now, because you're always creating something different that you're experiencing than what you were experiencing last, and you're on fire, right? Then that experience is going to be different with an enormous amount of energy. And you can translate that in your pH, right? How fast, if you will, in some ways you can measure that as bioregeneration. Because I've noticed, for example, if you've noticed it just in my visual, my mugshot, I got more dark hairs growing now than I have white hairs, no color. So I've noticed over time that I have more hairs that are growing. So in other words, the visual information codes is different than what they were before, because now I'm experiencing a greater number of dark than a greater number of light or white or gray, right? So the visual information changes. Just as I mentioned before, you take a 3 discs, 3 waves, 3 circles, Gaia's logo, green and gold, right? And then, of course, you have the vesica piscis, which is the 2, the Venn diagrams. So you realize circles, law of spheres, right? Because it's the most energetic, efficient form in which more light can be experienced and spread with an enormous amount of fire at the center point of the cross. So you want the water worlds to be in balance, right? Between hot and cold, right? So that's why I remember watching a short little video by a lady, beautiful woman, has an enormous amount of positive knowledge that relates to health and wellness, right? About how you can use warm water when you have mucus congestion in your nose to clear it, right? I can remember when I was As a matter of fact, I watched a video the other day where a mother, was with her child who was flushing the nasal passageways. And I had that problem when I was a small child with generating an enormous amount of mucus, and went to a doctor to have a procedure done in the 1950s where they were using tubes, much in the same way, you know what a nasal gastro tube is, right? And flushing out all the mucus. So you understand the generation of mucus is really dead cells, which is like a dead cell phone. Cell phone, pH 0 or 1 Ne. On electric. pH, the electric is on. pH on E. On E. Dial 0 for the operator. See how that goes? Dial 0 for the operator. A disk, a 0, a sphere. A disk face, like a disk drive. Anyway, it's you can see the changes that are taking place by the way that the flow of information that is coded mathematically, and it's humor's plant medicine, right? Plant power plant, hydroelectromagnetic power plant, wastewater treatment center, just like the planet. Plant's a recycling center, right? Recycle bins. So it's this is how I described it a long time ago. You know what it's like to have parasites in your own wastewater treatment system, right? That are feeding on all the acid, right? We're not acid batteries. The sugars, starches, and all the rest of that generate mucus. Now you become a source of food. Now we're into food chains. As above, so below on food chains, blockchains. And so when I realized that having colonies, the 13 colonies, 13 colons, 13 colonies, parasitic colonies, 13 parasitic colonies. The original 13 stars, white stars, they're not white stars. So they invert everything. So that's a black star, a black sun, right? So in other words, they pretend to be one thing, but they're actually another. And then you get into the reversal currents in consciousness by that translation. Oh, the 13 colonies, they believe in freedom, the Declaration of Independence, that we're endowed by our Creator, and all the rest of this happy horse shit, right? And then, of course, I realized when I was studying not just the military history of trying to figure out how long have they been harvesting energy off of people here and running DNA Frankenstein experiments, and then doing the math on the inception of technology and the acceleration of technology through artificial intelligence, if you will, augmentation, right? And building different versions, one version after the next, right? And then flipping it the other way to say, okay, let's build another version that goes the other way. So now you begin to see the difference between the two, which means one version is meant to protect the universe, the other version is meant to destroy it. Or if you will, one mirror is in love with itself and the other mirror is destroying itself. So one is a life giver and the other one is a garbage disposal. Fungus, right? It acknowledges that your behavior, your consciousness is choosing to run a self-suicide program, so the fungus will naturally accommodate you, which is your cancer, right? Then you got to throw in everything else that they throw at everybody in order to kickstart that process of degradation, which is biodegradation, which is losing the vessel. Now your consciousness is experiencing the loss of energy, and as a result, there goes your hologram. Just biodegrades. It just goes back to stardust, right? Yeah. So what remains? The bones. How long the bones remain, right? Bones, B1. Bones, B1S. Remember Bones, Star Trek? He was a doctor with a tricorder. Tri-waves, 3. H2 plus 1 equal 3. 3 waves, trinary. 3 poles, right? And we're into poles and pole climbers, right? I'm a monopole, which is a mated chip, which means I'm in balance between the female and the male side, right? That's balance in your water worlds. That means you have an enormous amount of fire to protect the universe, which is a universal template, which is a DNA template of seeded races, right? So anyway, have a beautiful day. The sun's out here. I'm hearing. I've mentioned this before, but I experienced the changes that are taking place in the planet's magnetosphere because my headset, which is your radio set, right? Crystal receiver and transmitter is with the S Bones B1S, a monopole B1S spiral. So it's I can hear the hissing sound. It's loud, and I've experienced it in other ways as well. It's a little hotter because I can feel the hotter particles. Usually, it's on my face around here. I experience it first, and then a lot of it depends on how many hours I sleep at night, right? Which means I don't need much time for my cell phone to recharge itself before I'm up and running again, right? So, this is the largest shield volcano. So the energy here is powerful that you can tap into if you're like a sponge, right? So you can understand why, for example, the density. It's actually it's not the same everywhere you go on the island. It depends on who you are, how you experience being here, right? But I'm hearing loud hissing sign, like being inside a pressure chamber, hissing. Hissing loud, hissing really loud. And of course, it's going to vary, right? Because you realize the simple calculator that you're running between minus slash plus, right? Maintain the poles, balance in the water worlds. So you can measure the pH of the planet, right? I was doing that many, many, many years ago, monitoring the changes that are taking place on the health of the planet, which is the health of the water worlds, right? Consciousness and memory and all the rest of it. So anyway, have a beautiful day. We love you all. The breath of living spirit.